Looney asks, a good question would be, why use natural organic products? Are they less polluting or better for the environment to use versus mineral fertilizers? The only good argument I can think of to use a natural organic product would be in the case of a documented phosphorus deficiency and you applied the product based upon the known deficiency. So let's say you were deficient in phosphorus and it was documented as a turf response deficiency, and you confirmed that with a soil test. Let's say it was, I don't know, 5 or 6 parts per million, maybe like 3 phosphorus or something. You're like, okay, that's probably what it is. Then I would apply it based upon your regional or local maximum allowed limits of phosphorus application. So if it was a half a pound of P, then I would apply a half a pound of P. And I would apply that as frequently as the law would allow me to until that phosphorus deficiency is resolved. Other than that, there's a whole slew of complete nonsense from natural organic suppliers about dormant feeding. I would apply, you supply carbon to the soil and it increases microbial activity and all these things, which all may be 100% correct. But I've never seen an ounce of evidence from any of them, any of those manufacturers, that would even remotely come close to convincing me that what they're saying is true. They'll say, okay, this golf course applied this natural organic during dormancy, and look how much greener it is than all the other golf courses and then in the area. Meanwhile, you go around and look at the other golf courses, all the other golf courses are green too. It's like, so what about them? They didn't apply your product. They waited until the spring and they put it out and they look just as green as your product. This fairway does. And meanwhile, they avoided all that environmental risk, potential and economic loss by not applying it and just waiting and putting on a soluble or inorganic form in the spring. But they'll use that as an example to convince people, like, this fairway's super green and they put out a dormant feeding. Well, go look at all the other fairways that didn't do dormant feedings. Across the street, they look fine. So it's a means to convince the uninformed or the uneducated or the easily convinced, to buy their product. When in reality, applying any nitrogen, any phosphorus to grass that has 0 chance of taking it up is not a BMP. Sorry, guys. It's not a best management practice. I don't really care about potassium and calcium and any element that's not known to be an element of impairment. That's an economic loss to you. I care about that. I wish you didn't do it because I can see you being taken advantage of financially. You're probably not as sharp as you could be if you're doing that. But that's an economic loss to you and your business. I mean, I don't like it. I wish, we could do more about it. But in the cases of dormant applications, I'm more concerned about N and P because that affects the guy down the road. It doesn't just affect you. It affects everybody else in the community. And whenever there's zero, basically in the short and skinny of it is, whenever there's 0 chance the turf grass can take it up, there is 0 good reasons to apply nitrogen and phosphorus. The whole point of applying nitrogen and phosphorus is so that the turf grass can take it up. And if it doesn't have the ability to do that because it's dormant, then it's not wise, and therefore it's not a BMP. Straightforward. Okay, guys? We're going to look at a website right here that says the exact opposite. So I wouldn't use natural organics. Even when the phosphorus is low and you can use it, you could use it for phosphorus remediation or not remediation, but phosphorus to supply phosphorus in deficient turfgrass situations. But the expense is enormous. The expense to do that is enormous compared to other phosphorus fertilizers. You could do it for much less money using DAP. Diammonium phosphate, monoammonium phosphate is going to be a fraction of the cost to supply that phosphorus compared to the natural organics. And it's going to get you the same response, basically. You probably even do it quicker because it's immediately available versus the natural organic requiring it to break down over time a little bit before it's finally available. Okay. The natural organic is going to be anywhere from 4 to as high as maybe 10 times more expensive on a pound per nitrogen basis. So a pound for phosphorus basis would be somewhere in that same vicinity. Okay. When you look at natural organics, they can be deceiving because it's like, oh, this one's only whatever, $20 a bag, or $500 a ton, or whatever the case is. But the analysis is so low, you have to apply 10 times as much or 8 times as much, whatever. If its analysis is a 640 versus an 11480, you can see how much more you'd have to apply to get the same amount of nitrogen down, or the same amount of phosphorus down. And then what happens is, I love this argument. I'll say, well, the nitrogen or the phosphorus in let's take DAP, for example. The nitrogen and phosphorus in that product is so high, the spread rate is only, I don't know what the number is, 50 pounds per acre or 100 pounds per acre or whatever it is. It's very, very low. And you're going to have prills. You're going to have all these distances between the prills once they hit the turf grass. Whereas the natural organic, it's low, and you're going to have much more distribution of phosphorus across the turf grass, uniformly, which is true. Particle size the particle distribution is going to be much more with the natural organic. But my comment is, show me the evidence. Show me where. I know for sure you're going to apply more particles with natural organic. I got that, but I don't care about that. Don't get deceived. Don't get going. Let someone lead you down these roads. Like, that sounds kind of convincing. Yeah, I can apply more. It's the same amount of phosphorus, but it gets spread out more evenly. If I don't do that, then one particle is going to be here, and another particle is going to be there with the diammonium phosphate, and there's not going to be enough phosphorus for the turf. Don't be convinced by these poor arguments, because all you got to do is, where's the evidence for that? I want to know about what the turf looks like, and despite my best efforts, which I have tried, I've gone from micros all the way up to high granular, low analysis, all the way up to high analysis fertilizers, and tried to see differences in some of these products in terms of the turfgrass response. And only very rarely do I see differences. Do I see like a green circle here, a green spot here, versus no green spots over there from a larger particle distribution product? It's not easy to pull out these differences because you have low particle rates versus high particle rates on the nitrogen, on the phosphorus too. When it comes to herbicide applications or pesticide applications, it might be a little different, but it's, the particle size argument is a pretty poor argument when it comes to the differences between what you'd see from applying phosphorus as DAP compared to natural organic products. But what they're saying is true. You're going to have more particles using the natural organic. That part is true. I don't care about that. I care about what the turf response is going to be. Show me what happens then. That would be what would convince me. Yeah, imagine the storage and trucking expenses of using an organic versus phosphorus. Looney's saying, that's a good point, Looney, is that when you buy a pallet of, let's say, I don't know, a blended fertilizer, a 3210 or something, I don't know. You buy a pallet of it. If you want to buy the same amount of nitrogen or the same amount of phosphorus from a natural organic, well, just do the math. So 2,000 pounds times, what did I say, 30? Times 0.3, you got 600 pounds of nitrogen in a ton of a 3210 or whatever. So you got 600 pounds. In order to get the same amount of nitrogen from a natural organic, you just simply divide that by the percent nitrogen in the natural organic, which let's say it's 6%. That's 10,000 pounds. Divide that by 2,000, 5 tons. So you'd have one pallet supplying the same X amount of nitrogen. Let's do it as natural organic. You'd have to buy 5 pallets. Okay. 5, and you have to store 5 pallets. You have to spread 5 pallets to get the same amount of nitrogen as from an inorganic source. That's a good point, Looney. Eric asks, could the organic fertilizer pose a greater environmental risk due to the unpredictability of its breakdown? I would say to that one, Eric, we'll go into the environmental risk of organics and inorganics and so forth when it comes to leaching and runoff. I would say in general, no. Would the organic pose a greater environmental risk due to its unpredictability of breaking down? I would say in general, no. Okay. If you put out the products at the same rate, at the same time of year, and there's no freak weather happens and everything's fine, then the natural organics will generally be will generally result in a reduced risk compared to inorganics, generally. But you're generally not going to apply inorganics at the same rate as you would organics. So, for example, you might apply an inorganic at a pound or pound and a half of nitrogen. And let's say, I don't know, let's use St. Augustine grass in Florida. You might apply a pound and a half as an inorganic. I think in Florida you can go up to 2 pounds in if it's slow release. I think it's the law there. Don't quote me on that. But as an inorganic, you can only go up to 0.7 pounds, which again is another issue. That's whatever. But the point is, you generally would apply lower rates of inorganics compared to organics. Okay. But when you apply the inorganics at these lower rates, the environmental risk is very, very low already. It's not going to generally result in some sort of environmental consequence that's of any meaningful level, assuming you're following best management practices. Okay, you're applying it when the grass is growing, not when the grass is going into dormancy. You're applying it during a quote unquote typical weather pattern, not when there's a hurricane on the horizon, 3 days from now. These sorts of things, okay? But the natural organics in general have a little bit less of an impact than the inorganics, apples to apples. But again, the impacts of inorganics are minimal, assuming you follow correct BMPs. I don't want to say inorganics will cause problems, because generally they won't as long as you do it correctly. Okay. Good questions. Let's get to the website real quick, and then we'll shut this thing down and come back tomorrow. All right. So if you go over here to goodoldmillorgonite.com, and you'll see some articles, and one of the articles is lawn dormancy. Go down through here and it'll say fall and winter lawn dormancy. What is dormant fertilization? Dormant fertilization is a jump start on the spring. It's applied to cool season northern grasses after your lawn has lost most of its green color. You've stopped mowing your lawn because it no longer appears to be growing, and the cold weather has already set in. You're not feeding the grass for the growth above ground, but building up food reserves so the grass will go into winter strong and green up faster in the spring. Late fall is the most important time of the year to fertilize. One, I do not agree with this statement. Okay, you're going to have to provide me some evidence to be convinced that that's the statement, because I can show you evidence that the early spring will result in a more uniform and prolonged color response and quality response than applications of nitrogen in the late fall. So I can directly refute that, and so can you. Which is the critical part here, is that you all are learning, hopefully, where to go find this information. And you can go back in some of our episodes here that we've gone over and find the episode that shows that the early spring application oftentimes results in equal or greater response in longevity of color and quality than the fall application. So this late fall application, and they're saying specifically late fall is the most important. Clearly, we at this point have a good reason to be skeptical of that statement. And if you're so inclined, you can go pull those articles and directly refute this if so desired. But it says okay. What got me on this was you've stopped mowing. Northern grasses after the lawn has lost most of it. You've stopped mowing your lawn because it no longer appears to be growing. So I would say in general, when you've stopped mowing your lawn because it's slowed down so much, that's a good sign to not apply any more fertilizer. Why don't you just use that rather than a date and a temperature and a soil temperature, whatever? You can tell when I told you a couple weeks ago, whenever it was, a week ago, I'm mowing my lawn every week. The last 2 or 3 weeks, it's slowed down a lot. I'm really mowing it more now for the leaves, keeping the leaves mulched up and keeping them off the lawn so it has some more sun exposure and, help it along a little bit rather than I have a lot of leaves. But when your grass slows down to the point where you're like, man, I'm not cutting a lot of tissue here. The clippings are pretty low. I'm just kind of nicking the tips of this grass. And what they're saying is when this has happened, you can put out, and this is late fall, this is the most important time to fertilize. What I'm saying is, and what the literature is saying, more important, what the literature is saying, is that that's a good indication to stop or greatly slow down the amount of nitrogen you're applying, okay? But if you click on this dormant fertilization or benefits of dormant lawn fertilization, another article will come up. And this article is by Jamie Stoffenbach. I don't know Jamie. I know she graduated from Oklahoma State. OSU. They need to change those acronyms. There's 2 OSUs. I'm pretty sure she graduated from Ohio State. I could be wrong. But you can go through this article and read all the propaganda about them basically trying to figure out a way for you to buy more of their product because, you can put it out not just when the grass is growing, but when the grass is dormant, okay? What's the purpose of dormant lawn fertilization? Helps the lawn recover more quickly from winter damage and snow mold. Not aware of any evidence to support that. Greens up lawns more quickly in the spring and may help in maintaining its fresh green color through mid-May. There's a little bit of evidence that fall fertilization can provide that, as we've shown. Safer than early spring fertilization because walking on wet ground in spring can damage tender growth, causing turf loss. It's safer than early spring fertilization because you're saying that if it's wet and you're walking on it in the spring to spread fertilizer, you're going to cause problems. That's a pretty bad argument, guys. That's a pretty poor reason. Actively growing, you can say the same thing about them. Maybe it rained in the fall. Walking on it and spread it in the fall could have caused problems. Who knows? That's a huge dose of presupposition. Actively growing spring lawns will be better able to handle foot traffic. I agree. Actively growing spring lawns will be better able to handle foot traffic. We can achieve that with the normal inorganic applications in the fall, early fall or mid-fall, or go out in the early spring and apply a little bit of inorganic nitrogen and achieve that same response. I agree. A thick lawn keeps weeds down and casting shade on sprouting weeds sounds and keeps shade on sprouting seeds and keeps them from maturing. Now notice, and I'll come back to this if they don't delete it. Notice these last 2, actually these last 3, but these last 2 for sure, have nothing to do specifically with fall or late fall fertilization or dormant lawn. They're saying dormant lawn fertilization. They have nothing to do with dormant lawn fertilization. They're just trying to convince you, oh, yeah, that makes sense. It does make sense. A thick lawn keeps weeds down for casting shade on sprouting seeds. That does make sense. But it has nothing to do with late fall fertilization. That's just normal lawn management. You can achieve that with spring fertilization just as much as anything else. Okay, so don't be convinced because what's the purpose? Oh, that's a good purpose. Yeah, but it's a false equivalency fallacy is what it is. You're saying that this is going to happen as a result of that, and that's not the case. What's the difference between fall and winter? They're basically saying fall's when you're applying it and winter, da-da-da. Let's see, when do I apply? There's something else I thought I wanted to say in here. No, you only use slow-release fertilizer for dormant fertilization. It's important that you only use slow-release nitrogen fertilizer such as milorganite, which will stay on the soil of your dormant lawn until moisture and temperature conditions are just right for soil microbes to break down the nutrients for your lawn to use early spring. Quick-release fertilizer should not be used for dormant feeding. I agree. There shouldn't be any fertilizers being applied to any fertilizer applied to dormant grass, but certainly not quick release and definitely not slow release. Neither one of them should be applied, but they're beaten up quick release fertilizers because as they immediately release nutrients, which could signal your lawn to start growing again. So it's a fear mongering thing. If you put soluble N down and a little bit of warmth comes up, and there's a little bit of nitrogen there to help get taken up in the plant and start. It could signal their lawn to start growing again. You don't want to do that. You want to keep it dormant because it's all we want to keep it asleep until it's naturally moving up. It's an unbelievably bad argument. Okay, a late season growth spurt accompanied by hard freeze can especially damage to lawns. So this again, fear mongering again. There's also a very real risk of water polluting runoff. I agree. There is a very real risk of water polluting runoff from that but more from the slow release. The soluble is going to move into the soil, in which case it's subject to leaching and potentially some subsurface below ground runoff, which can occur if it hits a hard pan and moves laterally. It can actually resurface. That can happen on solubles. But once it moves into the soil, it has very little ability or opportunity to run off. Your natural organic is the one that has the greatest chance of running off because it's still sitting there running off. I don't even think that would run off, honestly. I think it would still probably be sitting there because the turfgrass is an incredible organism. It's an incredible plant that keeps everything in tight and clean, and it's a good filter. But if you're going to argue that soluble is going to run off, then I'm going to argue that your milorganite is going to run off. That's a horrible argument. You shouldn't be doing either one, in my opinion. Okay? So I'm just going to have to say this, is that we're going to close this off with that article saying, if you're only going to buy their product for the 9 months that the grass is growing, well, they're thinking I can gain another 25% market or whatever that is, 25% purchases or whatever, if I figure out a way to convince people to buy it during the 3 months they shouldn't be buying it. Well, let's talk about dormant fertilization. Well, okay, then let's talk about the evidence to support dormant fertilization. Don't just believe what they wrote. Okay, it's not, they can write whatever they want to write. But until they show me some sort of evidence published in a scientific, refereed, reputable turfgrass journal, I'm not convinced by a long shot. And I'm hoping that now that we're done with the cool season fertilizer topic for a little while, I'm hoping that on some small level or greater, that a lot of you can read articles like that and go, wait a second, dormant fertilization, putting fertilizer down on dormant turfgrass? What? You know, and you start reading through the advantages, and like, that doesn't make much, you know, yeah, that makes sense, but that's the case for soluble and slow. A thick lawn is good for weed reduction. That's good for soluble or slow. What's the difference between those two in terms of weed management or weed prevalence? So that hopefully, I don't know if I'm just optimistic or naive, I don't know, but hopefully I'm hoping that you're, you know, if you didn't know it already, you're starting to gain a little bit of skepticism and the critical thinking skills to kind of avoid some of these marketing propaganda pieces that can lead to a great deal of wasted money and unfortunately increase a lot of potential environmental risk.